IndyCar champion again!
Let's go, boys! Oh my God! Let's go! Thank you! You guys are the best!
Welcome back to the DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, looking back at the Grand Prix of Portland, where we have crowned the 2023 NTT IndyCar Series champion. And yet again, Alex Palou absolutely stole the show in a performance which is really something up this year, just leagues above the rest of the field, claiming what's been a very, very deserved championship.
Yeah, it was fitting that he ended up winning the championship by picking up his 5th win of the season. I mean, he has become the first driver after a 17-year streak in terms of the IndyCar record books to win the championship before the final race. Dan Weldon was the last driver to win it before the final race in 2005. I think Bourdais maybe did it in Champ Car in 2007, but again, that's still a long time ago. That doesn't seem to count in the IndyCar records. Yeah, it was just a really authoritative performance that kind of embodied his season. I mean, he's always in the ballpark in qualifying. It was another solid qualifying. He just gets himself in the position. He got himself up to 3rd at the start. And then from there, really, he was the lead driver because, as we will get onto later, Graham Rahal, Scott McLaughlin in the front row started on the alternates, and it just really didn't work out for them. And Palou all of a sudden, took the lead in his second stint after running longer on the primaries in that first stint. And all of a sudden you look and he's got a 6-second lead. It's then an 8-second lead, and it's just building and building in just kind of typical Palou fashion. And by the end, he's coming out a pit stop ahead of Graham Rahal, which is just remarkable and really testament to the pace that he had. And he was cruising out front, and even after there was a late caution, he continued to dominate. Felix Rosenqvist was attacking on the alternates in that final stint, but Palou managed to fend him off and really wasn't under that much pressure in the end. And obviously Rosenqvist's tyres end up going off, and it was another really dominant win for Palou. He's the 3rd most successful driver after 62 races. The only drivers with better records are Mario Andretti and AJ Foyt, which says a lot about what Palou is doing already at only 26 years old. And yeah, it's just a stunning season, and still has a worse finish of 8th and 9 podiums in 16, 5 wins. It's just incredible and a really deserving champion.
Yeah, I'm also not surprised that he won it, before the last race. It's throughout the entire season, he's always seen so far ahead, and so it just always seemed so sure that maybe he'd win it, and any chances of someone kind of stopping that seemed very unlikely. But it's like you said, it's very Alex Palou. He's had, there's no other way to describe it, just an incredible season, and no one could have stopped him. And now that he's got that, and now we're going to be seeing what the battle is going to be like for second. Is there still a chance for a battle with second? I'm not entirely sure.
No, I think Dixon's wrapped that up now. So,
But back on Palou, you look at his season, and on track. I mean, off track's a different story, but on track, you can't really pinpoint any mistakes he's made. He still hasn't had a finish lower than 8th this season, which he's achieved twice. He's got those 5 wins and counting a total of 9 podiums, 12 top 5s. It's just remarkable, and he just hasn't taken his foot off the gas all year, and the performances have showed this. Like 5 wins in an IndyCar season is pretty incredible. Obviously, New Garden's done it last season, but obviously Palou's coming on road and street, and where he's not a strong asset on ovals, he's taken another basically 5 races, which he's got a smaller chance of winning. And he's just been such a runaway champion. And this was always going to be a case of if not when. When not if. And just absolutely deserving. I don't think there's too much more to say. This was a long time coming, and the right champion this year.
Yeah, I mean, people have banded around the whole, he's not had any bad luck like other drivers, but as we've spoken about in the past, he has had bad luck. Just look at the Indy 500, the incident with Rinus VeeKay. He recovers to finish 4th. I mean, it's at the end of the day, he races just about as clean as anyone. So he's not getting into, little incidents where he is going to have contact that may be unfortunate and not his fault and put him out of the race because, he's just so measured in the way he drives, and that's how he has achieved this consistency. But it's not just been consistency, it's been consistent, just remarkable results. Like, we speak about Scott Dixon's consistency, but compared to Palou, while still it's consistent, Palou is just pulling off the most remarkable results, and he consistently seems to have the fastest pace in the field as well. It's really incredible what he's done, and even if he had an instance or two of bad luck, he'd probably still be leading the championship. So yeah, it's one of the most dominant seasons we've seen, really.
It's also just how he responds to like the bad luck. It's any driver can have bad luck. We've seen loads of them that have had it, and it's just to be able to kind of deal with it and kind of carry on racing as if it didn't happen, as if it can't affect him and still get good results. It speaks to the amazing driver that he is. There's no other way of describing it, and nothing that we can say that we haven't already said. He's an incredible driver, and the way that he's dealt with any problems just speaks to that. Amazing.
Yeah, and I think we're going to speak about Palou plenty on the off season, so we could probably go on here for hours. But his drive in Portland, I think, was pretty sensational too. His qualifying has been pretty remarkable. He might have been fast six at almost every race. I don't quite have the statistics on me, but he's been almost fast six almost every race, and wherever he qualifies, it still looks like he's going to be a threat. Obviously, lined up fifth in Portland, but he got cycled to the front pretty early on, and he was still pumping in the lap times when Rahal and McLaughlin were on fresh shreds, and he was still pumping in those lap times and building the gap. And obviously, Rosenqvist was on the rest of the end. Yes, Rosenqvist was on a tyre save, but he carried on putting that gap, and he's becoming a bit like Scott Dixon. You give him a task, and he'll just do it, and that's the formula for winning.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned qualifying there. Palou has qualified inside, I think, the top 8 every single race, bar 2. I think he's only once missed the fast 12, or at least not been in the top 12. He qualified 12th in the second Iowa race, and
Toronto
15th in Toronto was the only real outlier. But that was that odd qualifying session where it started raining in the middle of his group, so there were mitigating factors there. I mean, as you said, in races, his pace has just been phenomenal. When you've thought, other drivers on what should be a faster set of tyres, you're thinking, oh, will they make inroads here? They just don't. And more often than not, Palou actually continues to build the gaps, even, if there's lap traffic, which has sometimes been an issue on road courses this year. It was a problem Portland yesterday, with it being such a short lap time relative to a lot of road and street courses. But Palou just, they're not even issues to him, these little things that other drivers may trip up on. Palou just keeps a clear head, navigates them, and, that's why he's in the position that he's in.
Let's give a quick word to Scott Dixon. It's been, all things considered, you could probably argue it's been a championship deserving year for Dixon in some ways, but where Palou's been so strong, Dixon has had no chance. But third place, it was a valiant effort. He started better than Palou in the early stages, but obviously Palou pulled out that strategy. And Dixon's consistency, you could argue, has been up there with Palou. His worst finish this year, 7th. Obviously, we've spoken about Long Beach and length before, and that's the only anomaly there. It's just very Scott Dixon performance again. There was no chance of catching Palou in Portland, no chance of catching him in the championship, but I think second place is very deserving for Dixon on that front.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a race that really outlined where the deficit's been to Palou for Dixon, that he just hasn't quite had the pace. Where he's won those 2 races, he's relied on strategy, albeit, he executes it in an unthinkable manner and in a manner that other drivers just couldn't even fathom doing. But yeah, you kind of feel like in terms of outright speed, Palou has just had the edge. He had the edge yesterday, and it shows Palou has 9 podiums. That was only Dixon's 5th of the season, actually. Obviously, he's had that consistency, and actually, aside from the big anomaly of Long Beach, has the a better, worse finish than Palou, as I think we probably mentioned last week. But yeah, it was another good weekend from Dixon, and he definitely deserves, second place in the championship. He's been far more consistent through the season than Newgard, and he's just constantly managed to, draw out result after result. And he hasn't quite had that peak performance of Palou, and I think that's ultimately where the deficit lies. But, it was still an excellent season. And as you said, if it was a normal season where you didn't have this complete, monster in Palou, then Dixon could well be contending for his 7th championship. But yeah, there's a lot of encouraging signs, especially late in the season, to suggest that Scott Dixon absolutely has another championship in him still, if he can just get the measure of Palou, which does seem a tall order for the entire field.
Let's give a little shout out to maybe the driver of the day, Felix Rosenqvist. Second place, his best finish with Aaron McLaughlin as he looks to leave the team this week, actually. It might be announced by the time this podcast goes live, so keep your eye out for that one. He's off to my shack next week, but he got second place in his penultimate race with McLaren. It's actually his best result with the team, and I put this in my preview. Rosenqvist has actually been really, really strong at Portland. He got second when he was at Ganassi. He was 10th last year, and he was 6th the year before that. So it's been fairly strong around Portland, and had a fairly strong day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm disappointed really for Felix that he isn't keeping this, quote unquote, top drive, because Meyer Shank have struggled a bit, and this is kind of a performance that shows that Rosenqvist really, he, on a good day, he can have the measure of all of his teammates, which is impressive when you're talking about Pato O'Ward and Alexander Rossi. He was unfortunate in qualifying. He looked, well placed to get into the fast 6 after the first runs, and then had some sort of mechanical issue that meant he had to start 11th, but he just cycled forward really quite quietly. The McLarens were, as we've seen quite often this season, duking it out, and that speaks to how really they've been quite on par with one another at times. I think O'Ward's obviously been the outstanding driver, but Rosenqvist is by no means leaving the team because he's been performing poorly. I think he is, at the end of the day, just chasing that certainty, and the team haven't necessarily offered that to him. Obviously, with the Palou situation, there's a lot of lack of clarity for Felix that he will be chasing. I think he got a bit fortunate in terms of finishing second. Scott Dixon wasn't too happy after Agustin Canapino had his incident. They waited quite a while to throw the caution, so Rosenqvist wasn't disadvantaged by not being allowed to pit. But instead, they kept the pits open. He stopped and then actually made up ground on Dixon. Didn't have to have an outlap. But I think regardless, Rosenqvist was going to be on the podium, and it's a good way to kind of bow out with only one race to go with McLaren, getting his best finish for the team, and really showing what Meyer Shank are going to be getting.
I had no idea that was going to happen. Really, I've not seen it, but like I said, it's definitely not going to be due to performance. I feel like Aaron McLaren would have been very lucky to have kind of Felix, and he kind of contributes something to the team. And like I said, I feel like just going down to Meyer Shank would just be the certainty of it. They always kind of want that, and kind of just without that, I feel like he'd always be on the edge of his seat. And but yeah, it's definitely just the certainty of it all, and not due to his performance at all, because it's been really good.
Let's roll it back to the Canapino spin, because there's been quite a little bit of an argument going on here. Obviously, just in case you weren't aware, Canapino spun. Rosenqvist was the only one who was off strategy at this point. They waited to throw the caution to let Rosenqvist pit to get back onto the strategy cycle. Is this fair? Is this the right thing to do? Obviously, a lot of people have thrown things around where, at the end of the day, you've still got a stranded car in a dangerous area whilst cars are at full racing speed. So I'd be interested to hear your guys' thoughts on this one.
I think it's hard to find a balance, because if you throw the caution, it's probably going to disadvantage drivers. But then by waiting and letting them pit, you were almost advantaging them unfairly. It's a tough one, but at the end of the day, the caution is there for safety reasons. And, you see this on ovals. If there's an incident, the caution will be thrown straight away. And I think that precedent has to be followed at road courses. It's for safety at the end of the day. And, if there's an incident, it's just so be it. It's unfortunate for drivers, and it would have been mightily unfortunate for Rosenqvist if he wasn't then allowed to pit, and would have lost a lot of positions. But yeah, I mean, if it was thrown straight away, Rosenqvist would have been disadvantaged to a far greater extent than the one place advantage he gained, and he may have even got past Dixon anyway on the faster alternate tyres. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's for safety. I mean, one solution is you just keep the pits open. You look at F1; they don't close the pits during a safety car. Do you need to, even close the pits during a caution? That's something that you could do to get around this, I think. Obviously that, further impacts strategy, and yeah, it's a tough situation. I think maybe the solution would be to just keep the pits open, but you've got to throw a caution as soon as there is an incident, because you can't have a car there stranded and cars still going around at full racing speed, because if that happens again, some other car can make the same mistake and end up exactly where the car that has had an incident is. So yeah, it's a tough one, but I think really they've just got to remember that cautions are for safety.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think as soon as kind of an incident happens, I think as soon as they kind of know that that's happened, the caution should be kind of put out. I feel like they shouldn't really look at what other people's strategy is and kind of take that into account, because it's like I said, it's there for a reason. If they were to go around, someone could easily hit into him, and that could end up worse than it is already. And I know that I don't know, people would be annoyed that it kind of would ruin them or give an advantage or disadvantage people, but caution should kind of be kind of thrown out no matter what other people are doing, strategy wise. It's just safety, and I don't know how to say it any differently. It's just, if someone else was to hit into him, that could just end up being so much worse. And it's just, I don't know. It's just, it needs to be called out as it happened.
At the end of the day, Rosenqvist has taken that risk by not pitting, fully aware caution could come out, and that's part of the strategy game. Because the thing is, if people will just wait even longer for cautions to come out if they know they can basically get away with staying on strategy. And Rosenqvist and the strategist took that risk by staying out longer. And if a caution came out, well, they should have pitted earlier. They should have thought about that. Everyone else did it. Obviously, Rosenqvist was a different strategy, but that's a decision you make. And it's unlikely to see a car go off, but what happens if, let's say, the car went off and hit Canapino and you cause a bigger accident? Maybe a local yellow solution at the very least, where, at least in that section of the track, have cars slowing down instead of keeping it green. There's plenty of potential solutions to this, but I think keeping it full speed green next to a driver's spun off isn't the wisest idea I've seen.
No, and it's a good point you make about, it needs to be factored into strategy initially. I think it might have been Hinch on the broadcast made the point that they'd taken a gamble when they went onto the primaries for their penultimate stint, which meant they had to commit to running the alternates late. And Hinch made the point that a caution comes out and all of a sudden Rosenqvist is in a very bad position. I think leaving the pits open, it just kind of makes it feel a little bit manufactured. Not obviously not saying they're trying to benefit any one driver. They're obviously trying to reduce an unfair disadvantage. But in this case, it disadvantages drivers who are, as was the case yesterday, Dixon, who was competing for second place or even the win, and ultimately he lost out on second place because the pits were left open and Rosenqvist was able to jump him and didn't have the outlap that Dixon, had to go through when he made his final stop onto the primaries.
Yeah, I think something we could look at more in depth in the off season, but I think it's definitely an issue which probably needs to be looked at. Yeah, I think all round a good day for Rosenqvist. I'd definitely be happy with the result that he gained. Obviously, his best McLaren result, and a nice way to end his time there. Let's go to P4 Passo Award. He was right in the mix for that podium, qualified 6th. We've mentioned people like Ericsson have their days and Palou has their days, Dixon has their days. Award's starting to get quite an award day now. He's competing at the front, just not quite got the pace of the front runners, but picks up a decent result.
Yeah, I think, we've spoken a bit about this, but Award's consistency since the Indy 500 and since Detroit, which were, two of the races where you kind of earmark, his approach was that wrong. I think, he's really upped his game since then and become much more measured, and he's achieved real consistency. That's now 4 podiums since Detroit, so that's a real upturn. He can't quite get that win, but his worst day was 10th in Iowa, and to have had, and I remember at the time he was like miffed as to what was going on with the car, but to have a day that he perceived to be a really bad day and still finish 10th, that's what O'Ward has to establish. And, if you take away those few days, Long Beach, the incident with Dixon, the 500 where, he could have just bided his time a little bit more. Detroit where, there was misfortune in there, but again, he could have stayed in the race, tried to pick up, a few more points just because it did become quite a chaotic race. I think since then his approach has really changed for the better. But yeah, he's just got to carry that into next season and not have those slightly wild days that I do genuinely think he has learnt from.
Yeah, there's been a clear upturn in form. He's had, I think it's 9 top 10s in a row now, and now he is on 9, which is pretty remarkable. And that's his 9th top 5 of the year. So only Palou and Dixon have more this season. Although I feel like race pace is lacking at times, he's getting the results in, and that's going to be the important thing. I think going into next year, if he is going to launch a title fight, he's going to be pumping in those podiums. And obviously there are a few mistakes. I think maybe Mid-Ohio was potentially a lost opportunity there, but all round it's been a significant upturn in form, and whether he can put Newgarden to 3rd in Laguna Seca is going to be a big one to watch out for. Talking to Newgarden, he was P5. It's actually a bit of a chaotic weekend for Newgarden. He obviously crashed in qualifying, and then he has to go the escape road on lap 1. Ended up being his 2nd best result on a road course this year, which isn't too bad. Bit of a wild day, but all things considered, not a bad result at all.
Yeah, I think generally Penske were a bit stronger. They had a rather poor first practice session, but I think they actually put that down to the fact they were testing things for next year. And then come second practice, they put it 1 and 2 with McLaughlin and Newgarden. And Newgarden, as a rarity, brought out red flag in the Fast 12 and got wedged quite deep in the tyre barrier in that quite tricky closing complex of corners that was catching quite a few drivers out. But yeah, really solid weekend for Newgarden, given, where he has been at times on road and street courses. It was a stark contrast to the Gallagher Grand Prix a few weeks ago, where he was absolutely nowhere, qualified quite far back, and got caught up in that early incident and ended up laps behind. So yeah, it's an encouraging result for Newgarden, and he'll hope he can back it up at Laguna. I think last year was quite impressive at Laguna. Obviously, he was still in the championship fight. He had that moment, I think, at the corkscrew in qualifying, and ended up starting right at the back, but he absolutely charged his way through the field to finish 2nd. So he needs that again to secure 3rd in the championship. No 2nd for him this year for the 4th consecutive year. Sorry, but maybe breaking that duck will be what he needs to go on and have a championship charge next season, which he would deserve, really. But yeah, this is the sort of template, what he produced in Portland, recovering, from, it's only 12th. It wasn't a massive recovery, but he seemed like the fastest Penske. McLaughlin obviously lost out after starting on the alternates. Yeah, good weekend for Newgarden. And if he can produce more of that, more consistently, then that's what will elevate him and kind of close that gap to Palou.
Yeah, to kind of just have that little bit of the increase of improvement in qualifying, it's for Penske as well. It's got to be kind of a good thing. It's not. They've had the ups and downs kind of throughout the season. And it's like, obviously, it's not going to be like the enjoyment of a win, but to kind of know that they can do that and just to kind of carry that on to Laguna and kind of onto next season, hopefully, like the whole team and kind of himself can have more consistency kind of going through it, and to just not struggle kind of how they have this season.
So it's going to be Newgarden versus O'Ward heading into Laguna. There's 9 points between them. There's actually a bit of research. This is actually quite important one for O'Ward because he still is yet to have an FIA super license. And although his F1 path is probably closing, he still wants to tick off their super license points. And he needs further in the standings to get that. So it's a bit on the line with Pato O'Ward coming into Laguna Seca. 9 points between them. Early predictions on who's going to take that. Or anyone think McLaughlin might even pull it out of the bag?
Well, should we talk about McLaughlin actually? Because I think he could be a genuine option for it, just because he seems to have developed such a knack for qualifying so well. I mean, 6 top 2 qualifying positions in 7 races. Yes, 3 of them were on ovals, but aside from, on the Indy road course, it's been really strong for him in qualifying, and only really marginally missed out on yet another pole position as he qualified behind Graham Rahal this weekend. And it was just really unfortunate that he couldn't convert it. It was just strategy didn't work out for him. Rahal, I think Rossi was another in that ballpark of starting on the alternates, not working out. And it was one of those races where McLaughlin didn't really do anything wrong, yet ended up 9th, which I think I'm right in saying is his worst finish since the Indy 500, which again speaks to this consistency that he's developed, not only in terms of like consistently pretty remarkable qualifying pace, but also in races he's pulling together probably the best consistency of his IndyCar career, and that's something that's been a slight criticism of him in what is still his early days in IndyCar, that he's had these errant weekends where he might make an error or get into some trouble somehow, but he's really not doing that anymore, and he's putting together some really solid results. So I think he will be driven heading into the final race to try and keep up that quite remarkable qualifying record that he's established since the 500, and convert it into a second win of the season. And I wouldn't put it past that happening. Newgarden obviously was strong at Laguna last year, as I've said. I think he would maybe be the banker in terms of finishing third, but I wouldn't put it past McLaughlin, given the form he's been on recently, that has kind of really elevated his season from one where people were saying, oh, he's been a bit disappointing, admittedly, against what were probably quite excessive expectations for a third-year driver. But yeah, I think he's got a shot, and he's definitely got a shot at getting O'Ward, I would say.
You going for him?
I'll go for him, yeah. I'll back him.
I've got to back O'Ward. I've got to back my man. I think just if you look at the road course form, he's been overall a bit stronger than Newgarden. Laguna isn't his best track. Newgarden's gone pretty well at Laguna. Recent years, obviously, made that comeback to second last year. Finished 8th in 2019 and 7th in 21. So he hasn't gone badly at Laguna. O'Ward, on the other hand, it isn't his strongest track. I think he was 8th there last year, 5th in 21. So it's not a bad track for O'Ward. But a bit on the line for O'Ward. So we'll see if he does go for a bit more. P6, I think, is probably the other standout driver of the day, who's Rinus VeeKay. We spoke a lot about ECR's struggles this year, and pulled it out of the bag. Really impressive P6, and it sort of came out of absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on Rinus actually away from recording, but he's really quietly kind of had a bit of an upturn. I mean, his 2 practice sessions were impressive. I think he finished 8th and then 6th. And he was disappointingly just on the edge of the Fast 12, missed out, but he recovered into the top 10 quite quickly in the race, and he kind of became a factor inside the top 10 for the entire race, and to come home 6th at what was actually Bitnile's home race in terms of they actually had the naming rights for the Grand Prix of Portland this year. It was a really solid weekend for VeeKay, who is quietly, sort of very impressively, ahead of Malukas and Ilott in the standings for an ECR team that, it's been widely covered how abject their performance has been. So, VeeKay's kind of quietly got on with it's not been a remarkable season, but he's actually pulling together quite a strong end. I think this builds on 2 consecutive 11th places inside the top 14 in the last 4. So that's a lot better. And, VeeKay has not been someone we've spoken about much just because we've not really seen much of him. But this was a weekend that really reminded us that, this guy's a talent, and this is why he was sought after by, from teams like McLaren.
I think it's definitely going to be a confidence boost as well. As we said, recent upturn in form, came 11th from Gateway, as well as the Indy GP, and he pulled a pretty impressive 6th place out of pretty much nowhere. But he was, as you said, he was going well in practice. Maybe slightly unfortunate not to make the first 12 in there as well. And it's going to be a boost for him. It was only 6 points off Graham Rahal in the standings, which is pretty remarkable. We'll get onto him later. But I think just a really nice all-round weekend for VeeKay, and hopefully a confidence boost maybe going into next season, because he's shown at times before he's got potentially, hard to forget, he won a race a couple of years ago, and he's got a couple of pole positions alongside that, and I think maybe he is someone who deserves to showcase his talent a bit more, and it's just a bit of shame he's been a bit quiet over the last couple of years. P7, Marcus Ericsson. I think you'll agree, Marcus Ericsson's sort of day. Didn't really see too much of him, but he got a result inside the top 10.
Yeah, I didn't see too much of him. Well, we might touch on him briefly when we come on to Alexander Rossi's race, though.
Yes. P8, David Malukas, actually a bit disappointing in qualifying. Qualified, I think, was 23rd, and a bit like VeeKay, he kind of randomly just appeared in the top 10 and got P8, which was a pretty good result for Malukas.
Yeah, it was a bizarre race for kind of having some strange things happen, that drivers kind of just appear somewhere, or just quite randomly drop off and don't become factors, as likes of McLaughlin, Rahal suffered. For Malukas, it was a really strong day in terms of where Coyne have generally been on road and street courses. I think he was disappointed. Was it 24th he qualified? And just to kind of cycle into the top 10 pretty seamlessly. I don't know whether they worked something on strategy or...
I think they were slightly off strategy, because he did a lap, so he must have been slightly off strategy somewhere.
Yeah, I think there was one point where he was kind of, I don't know whether he ended up in the lead. Obviously
there was a bit where he was just in front of Palou when he pitted for the lead.
Right, yeah.
Well. But
So that was a better day for Malukas, because you feel like a lot of his best form has come on ovals, and you've not really seen much of him elsewhere, but I think he has salvaged what started off as a really, quite a poor season. A lot of DNFs, not necessarily all his fault, but recently it's got better for him, and to pull out a top 10 on a road course. I think he finished 6th in Mid Ohio, which was, I think, the only road or street course performance better than that this year. So really strong from Malukas, and a big boost for Coyne.
Yeah, and obviously it looks like Malukas is off this week, so as Rosenqvist is off, he's also off to McLaren, it seems, so that's going to be an exciting move on that front. P9 was McLaughlin. We can't touch on him. Just the strategy starting on the race didn't quite work. P10 was Kirkwood, who had quite the day. Went off at turn 1, similar to Newgarden, and he had... There was Hunter Ray there. Hunter Ray was who we had contact with, pushed him onto the grass. Bit of a topsy-turvy day, and as Kirkwood has done in Road America. He did it in Detroit. He kind of has a messy first couple of laps and then just appears in the top 10.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've spoken about drivers having days that kind of emphasise sort of epitomise their seasons. As we spoke about with Palou, with Dixon, and it was a very Kyle Kirkwood day. I mean, a Kyle Kirkwood day this year, unless he's winning a race in which he seems to just really control affairs. He has a few incidents. I don't really know what happened in the first corner with Newgarden. I think Newgarden says he was just trying to avoid a bit of a crash, actually. And Kirkwood was kind of just, I don't know whether he was an innocent party or it was kind of just what happens in Portland Turn 1. We saw in the Indy Next race, there was a lot of carnage in the first corner. So it was actually quite clean by the standards of Portland. But yeah, Kirkwood got caught up in that. He obviously had that blocking moment with Hunter Ray, which I don't know whether that was an intentional move in reaction. He kind of just faded across on the not so straight back straight. He only got he had to drop 2 places for that. But yeah, he gambled on, I think he pitted under the first caution. He had quite a fuel save. It wasn't quite a Scott Dixon fuel save where he ends up at the front to finish 10th, though. It's a solid enough day for Kirkwood, who is, he's 11th in the standings. He's actually behind Colton Herta, which is quite surprising given he has 2 wins. But yeah, it's just a classic story of an Andretti driver not really managing utmost consistency through the season. But it was another one of those recovery drives that Kirkwood has shown he's quite adept at, and it shows his racecraft at the end of the day.
Yeah, making a habit of these. The incident with Hunter Ray was a bit odd. I mean, I think it was a bit on the naughty side. But race control was actually brought up again this weekend. I think the major one was with Palou when he came out the pits. It looked pretty blatant that he blocked Helio Castroneves coming out the pits. Race control turned a blind eye to it, and they were under the boil yet again. Race control.
Yeah, that one was a little bit strange. I'm not entirely sure what was going on because I'm not sure Palou was moving in reaction as much as they were both kind of. They both kind of looked like they were getting confused at what each other was doing. It's a bit like one of those where you're walking past someone and you both end up going the same way and trying to get out of each other's way. I think Palou kind of, as Castroneves he kind of looked like he was going left and Palou would move to the right, but then Castroneves would move to the right thinking Palou was going to cover him off. And at the end of the day, it was blocking, and I'm surprised Palou didn't pick up a penalty. Maybe I think as the precedent was set with Kirkwood, he had to drop 2 places. But yeah, maybe I don't know, because at the end of the day, does circumstance come into it with Palou obviously not being on the same strategy as Castroneves? Castroneves obviously would have had to have stopped again. Yeah, it was an interesting one, and it's one you kind of want a bit of clarity on.
I think it was on the naughty side of it. I think it was odd because they changed direction about 3 times, and was Helio really ever going to go for a move? You doubt it, but yeah, it just seemed a bit over the top for something so meaningless in the race. So yeah, that's a bit of an odd one. I think Kirkwood also had to drop 2 places. That was very naughty with Hunter Ray. There's a couple of cases of that, so we'll get into in a second. But yeah, race control, yet again, just loads of people are saying that race control are being a bit bizarre, and maybe it's something worth looking into, because how Palou's wasn't even investigated is pretty beyond me.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned Kirkwood should have, maybe set a precedent. Palou could have dropped 2 places. There doesn't really seem to be a precedent, though. There doesn't seem to be much clarity. They kind of just see an incident, and it almost seems at times like they just decide there and then, right, this is, we think it's this severe, we'll give this penalty. There doesn't seem to be any set thing they do. I mean,
yeah, they all seem very random. Like Herta got a drive through, didn't he, for speeding in the pit lane, which seems a bit excessive. So just all rather, I don't really think they have a set penalty system like other series do. It's just, that'll do. Yeah,
no, it definitely doesn't seem that way. I mean, and again, there's just incidents like you look back further back. I don't know. Was it Mid Ohio that VeeKay made contact with
Road America?
Rosenqvist. Was it Road America? Okay, I always get them both confused. So that went completely, unpenalised, which was incredibly strange. But yeah, there've been quite a few cases throughout the season, especially on road courses. I think another thing is, drivers being pushed wide, which we saw quite a bit. I think Ericsson was shoved off the track. That might have been by VeeKay even, actually. Then you had, on the first lap, Ilott going off, and that ultimately caused Grosjean to get quite some significant damage. So, yeah, I think they maybe need a bit more clarity on that stuff, because there is a lot of inconsistency in the way they sort of the stewards, or just how the decisions are made, really.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. P11 was Christian Lundgaard. It's been an underwhelming weekend for Lundgaard. Portland's sort of track he's gone on pretty well out before, and didn't really have the pace at all. Bit of a quiet one for him. Whilst we're talking about RLL, Graham Rahal, he looked like he had the pace. Fantastic strategy in qualifying. He said, I want to go on the blacks. Qualified and pole on the blacks. And same with McLaughlin. Just the reds just didn't work out. I think when they had the box earlier, they just got stuck in traffic the entire race. And that was their day done.
It's very strange to see that Lundgaard actually finished ahead of Rahal, because
it is, yeah.
Lundgaard just wasn't there. It was a really, really odd weekend for him, because he's obviously had such pace. I think his worst road course qualifying finish was 7th, I think, before this. And yeah, I think he got caught out by traffic, which was an issue on, as I said, is quite a short track, possibly the shortest lap time in terms of road and street course. He'd only missed the fast 6 on a road course, I think, once this season. That was when he qualified 7th, and yeah, it kind of set him on the back foot this weekend, missing out, and the race was just a bit disappointing. He didn't seem to have the pace that he's had on road courses in general this season, and ultimately couldn't avenge last year, which was a race where he was running well before hitting one of the advertising boards. Yeah. But yeah, I think Graham Rahal will be disappointed that he's actually ended up behind his teammate, because it looked like he would maybe have a chance to, get that win that he really deserved at Indianapolis a few weeks ago. But yeah, it just didn't work out. It was really odd that, I think we've mentioned, was it traffic possibly was a problem, having to pit earlier off the reds, and that just allowed Palou to go longer and longer, and all of those that started on the primaries, and ultimately it was an overcut that was just extreme after that first stint, and it was just crazy that Palou ultimately ended up a whole stop ahead of Rahal, which was it just unfolded in a very strange way, and Rahal's race kind of just spiraled a bit. He ended up out of push to pass. He was a bit defenseless on that late caution, and yeah, didn't work out how he'd like. It was kind of pace again from RLL, but they just didn't make the most of it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame, because you feel the win is coming for Rahal, but for whatever reason, it's just falling out of his grasp every time. And I think he drove as well as he could have, but once it was clear that was the wrong strategy, there wasn't really much he could do. Move on to P13, who was Colton Herta. I saw his tweet during the race, which is, it's not an IndyCar race. If Grosjean doesn't find a way to crash in 13th, and Herta doesn't find a way to get himself out of a good position, and yeah, again, it was a case of just Herta just cooked his tyres early on. He just used his tyres way too much early on, then he sped in the pit lane, then it was pretty much his day done from there.
Yeah, I mean, Herta's race was pretty much a story of pretty good position, qualified really well. I think, did he qualify third?
Third or fourth, yeah, he was up there.
Yeah. So good qualifying, was in a good position. I think obviously Palou jumped up to third. I think Herta was possibly running fourth. Then speeds in the pit lane, which, it's not great. That's the second time that's happened when he's been in a fairly, positive position. And then he's kind of just got a recovery job from there. But, he actually managed to get ahead of the starting front row again, who just... It is really strange how their races kind of just went really horribly from their starting positions. Just starting on the alternates was such a bad decision, and it's hard to figure out exactly why it ended up being such a bad decision. But yeah, Herta actually ended up ahead of them after that Canapino caution. I think he was 8th, and just as he was putting pressure on Marcus Ericsson for 7th to kind of cap off what would have been a very strong recovery, he spins.
Yeah.
It was just after the commentary team were actually crediting Herta for, he's had less of those sort of errors. And then quite a short while after, there we go, he spins. Obviously, it's not like he's fighting for a win and has made that error. It was, at the end of the day, he's going to finish 7th or 8th. He ends up finishing 13th. It's no disaster. But yeah, disappointing for Herta in the end because starting, I think it was third he started. He's in a good position. But yeah, ultimately, it's another day where Andretti will come away disappointed, having not capitalised on having speed and the driver in a good position.
Yeah, it's just another case for Andretti. Just something that goes wrong. They can never have a race where everything goes right. It's always something wrong. Especially in Herta's side of the garage, nothing seems to go right at times. So, will he get a win? I mean, he's got a pretty good chance next week, so we'll see how that one pans out. Helio Castroneves was 14th, ahead of Ilott in 15th. Ilott in the fast 12th for the first time this year. His race kind of fizzled out a bit, but it's pretty good for Ilott on that front.
Yeah, it was a good weekend for Ilott, actually. Probably, again, one of his better of the season, especially considering Juncos have really struggled in terms of qualifying speed this year. And Ilott, to get into the Fast 12 for the first time, qualify 8th as well. He was competitive in the Fast 12 and pushing for the Fast 6, which is more of a return to some of the form we saw, in part last season. Yeah, he had quite an offensive start to the race, actually, but he ultimately got pushed wide and I think obviously made contact with Grosjean and carrying a bit of damage from there, I think he said, which was a shame because it was a good chance for Ilott to put together another pretty strong result in a season that he has kind of just quietly got on with his business and done a fairly good job. So, yeah, disappointing, but an encouraging step to get into the Fast 12 and an encouraging step that could actually mean quite a lot because it looks like he may well be staying with Juncos. And
yeah,
whether that is on McLaren's books, as there have been some suggestions, I think possibly from Racer, who suggested that there is a possible alliance that could be formed and McLaren could have charge of one of Juncos's cars. Obviously, they seem quite keen on Ilott because why wouldn't they be? He's one of these excellent, young talents in this crop of drivers. So, yeah, it looks like he may be staying put, most probably. But a solid weekend. Unfortunately, he couldn't maybe push for the top 10 like the likes of, VeeKay Malukas managed to.
Yeah. Hard to think he qualified in the front row last year at Laguna Seca, but it's not worked out that far. But even Canapino looked at one stage he could get into the Fast 6. So a definite step up from Juncos this weekend. 16th was Ferrucci in front of Di Francesco. 18th was Yuri Vips on his debut. Pretty quiet debut. I don't think we're expecting too much from Vips' side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was decently on the pace, especially when you compare him to Tom Blomqvist, who was doing his second weekend, and this was from Meyer Shank. And yeah, RLL have had a better road course package, but Vips, you felt was he was on the pace relatively quickly. He had a solid opening practice session. I think he was on the edge of the top 10 for quite a bit of it. Maybe ended up around 15th, I think. And yeah, qualifying 18th. Again, it's not a bad effort for your first race weekend. Obviously, Lundgaard on debut. Did he qualify 4th on debut, I think?
Yes,
when he had his trial race. So it's not quite the heights that Lundgaard has set, but yeah, I think it was an all right weekend for Vips.
Yeah.
I mean, not masses to write home about, but didn't do much wrong. And looking at where Harvey was, it's not exactly any worse off.
Yeah. 19th was Armstrong, who at one stage looked like he was a bit of a threat for Rookie of the Year. Obviously, Canapino's incident helped him out a bit. A bit of a heart-and-mouth moment for Armstrong. Rossi was P20, and as I said, we'll get on to the incident with Ericsson. It was an interesting one. I think, obviously, it wasn't delivery, which is very unfortunate for Rossi, how it ended like that. But the final restart was absolutely wild.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell what really happened because it seemed like a bit like the Kirkwood Hunter Ray incident. I don't know if Ericsson actually got penalised or not for it, but it could have been nasty, to be honest, because Rossi, clipping one of Ericsson's rear tyres, front wing could easily have got stuck under the car. Thankfully, that didn't happen, and he was able to get his way back to the pits. But Rossi, as I said, was in the boat that McLaughlin, Rahal were on, I think, and just struggled a bit, having started on the alternates and dropped down relative to where his teammates were competing on the edge of the podium. Disappointing for Rossi. I mean, not much more to say than that. It was an incident that was wholly avoidable and prevented him from getting a top 10.
Yeah, a decent day for Rossi. Just obviously prevented him from getting any better. P21 was Hunter Ray, who obviously had that incident with Kirkwood, ahead of Peterson, Rob, Rosenqvist. Fairly quiet for Rosenqvist, but I think he got a bit more experience than turn 1, which will be handy to him. And then Will Power. Crazy weekend for Will Power yet again. Had that bit of a bizarre spin behind Rossi where it looked like he just carried too much speed and he stalled the car, and that was pretty much game over.
Yeah, it's just been it was a race that summarised a bit of what Power's season's been like. We've not seen this reinvented Will Power of last year. It's been just a bit disappointing for him, really. I mean, it's not been a horrendous season. He's still 7th in the championship, but it was a disappointing one for him. I mean, he just missed out on the fast 6. I think generally Penske actually were a bit faster in qualifying, but it was a big miscalculation, really. He just carried way too much speed in trying to pass Rossi, and spun, couldn't really do much else, and lost laps, and that was his day, really. There, done.
With all respect to Power, it's so hard to think that he was a defending champion last year because he's just been so anonymous at times. He's picked up 4 podiums, but I can't really remember any of them. It's just been such a frustrating year, and it looks like, dare I say, it's going to be a winless year, which is a bit of a shame because there were times last year where he just looked so strong, and that form has just not reflected this year. P26 Canapino, front of P27, Roman Grosjean. Yes.
Big sigh.
Talking of weekends to summarise a season, I think maybe Grosjean's is the best example. He missed out on the fast 12, had a strop in front of his engineers, which everyone caught on camera. Then he got on a lap 1 incident, which he fully blamed on Nylot. If you actually look at his onboard, he kind of got beached on the curve, so it was partially his fault. I'm glad it's over. I'm glad the Andretti.
For sure.
What more do you say? It's just a case of what could have been for Grosjean, and I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no point touching much on this race because I think it was more misfortune than error on this occasion. He clearly didn't see Ilott coming back on the track, and it was just a dust cloud, really, and ripped the left front off. They did a good job to get him back out, actually, by, I think, lap 12.
Pretty impressive.
I think qualifying is really where, the story of his weekend should be spoken about, because you just can't be just, blowing up on your mechanics like that. I mean, and just your team and blaming them for everything. I think he doesn't seem to take enough accountability. I think that's one place where his downfall has been during his time at Andretti, is that he's blaming people for things and not seeing that actually things could be his fault or things can be dealt with in a much calmer manner. Just with the cameras focused on you, it's not the time to just start getting embroiled in a huge argument with your team. And it felt quite fitting that NBC had spoken that Michael Andretti had announced that Grosjean wasn't going to be returning, and that was announced during that session, which he ultimately, missed out on transferring from. And then one of the main reasons for him, leaving the team was shown there in stark fashion as he just, it's no way to treat your team, really. And it's disappointing. And yeah, it's kind of just feels good that this whole Andretti thing's over. It hasn't worked out. If he gets a seat maybe at a smaller team, it can suit him where there's less eyes on him, there's less pressure. He's just never seemed particularly settled, and it was quite unsettling, the scene after he was knocked out in qualifying.
Yeah, it's just over the top, and even when Michael Andretti publicly criticises him, he just carries on doing it. I just don't understand it. You'd think, okay, maybe now I'll take a step back, and I think something like that award really took on board when it was going wrong. He realised what he's done, and now he's improved significantly. Grosjean, the attitude just seems stuck there, and it's so disappointing because so many people want to see Grosjean succeed, but I think he's his own biggest downfall than anything else.
Just a couple of other drivers, maybe to mention slightly. Marcus Armstrong, it looks like Rookie of the Year will be wrapped up now. He was actually on for one of his best finishes. He looked like he was going to finish inside the top 7 until a completely disastrous pit stop, which just completely derailed him. He lost his right rear tyre, I think, and he was held for way longer than he should have been, and ultimately lost a lap as well. And for Armstrong, that's disappointing because that kind of feels like the second time he's been robbed of a really strong result. I don't really feel like he's had that massive headline result yet in this rookie year, even if it has been, a really solid and, a wholly creditable rookie season. But yeah, that's disappointing for him. And I think the only other driver really to touch on is Tom Blomqvist. It was an underwhelming weekend, really. I think we were encouraged in Toronto after he qualified quite well in a tricky session where it was wet, changing conditions. But yeah, he was last in both practice sessions, which he couldn't improve from in qualifying either. Warm-up was his best session of the weekend, really, in 13th. But quite early on in the race, you were seeing him being lapped, and he got a pit speed violation, which contributed to that. But there's definitely work to do for Blomqvist. It's not going to be easy transitioning from sports cars. He's obviously got some experience in open wheel. He's been in Formula E on and off. But you look at how Blomqvist hit the ground running. Obviously, he is a sort of anomalously talented driver. It has transpired through the junior ranks. But yeah, there's work to do for Blomqvist because you look at what Blomqvist managed to produce in that car. Blomqvist was, quite a bit off the pace, really. I think he was even like 2/10 adrift in qualifying, and that was on a fairly short track. So yeah, work to do there, but I think it's good that he's getting this race and he'll be in the car for Laguna just to try and get his eye in, make sure into next season he's got maybe a slight head start on things because you can't be really starting next season like this. So it's 2 races just of learning. And as you said, at least he actually got the race this time.
Laguna's going to be a better indicator. He's obviously done quite a lot of racing there in IMSA. So yes, that will probably be a more realistic shot. I mean, I think it was a bit underwhelming, but we've got to give him time. So we'll see how he does next week, and obviously he'll have his entire rookie season to prove what he's about. So we'll see how it fares on that front. News time. So bit of news in the off week, as it always is in the driver market. The big one: Rinus VeeKay is going to be at Chip Ganassi next year, replacing Marcus Ericsson. He's had to wait for his IndyCar debut, but I think the wait hopefully is worth it. An absolutely huge move for Ganassi, a huge move for Lundqvist. Really, really excited. He thoroughly deserves it, and I'm really excited to see what he can do in a front-running car next year.
I'm so happy for him. I mean, he's a kid who's kind of not always had the opportunities he's deserved because of, some issues with funding over time. But it's good to see a major team put faith in him. And, it would be disappointing to have seen him have, a year or two in a car that was mediocre at best. And, he might challenge for the occasional top 10. But to have a front-running car that, Marcus Ericsson has proven that, it really can run near the front. It can win races, and Lundqvist will have that opportunity straight away, which is nice, as opposed to even looking at the likes of Malukas and Kirkwood, who have had to wait to get their chance at a big team. Kirkwood this year, Malukas, it seems like will get that chance next year. But yeah, Lundqvist he's just feels like a perfect fit. He's had such success through the junior ranks. He obviously dominated Indy Lights last year. He's, as I've said, hit the ground running in terms of his performances at Meyer Shank, and that's already some learning for him. He's done a race on every track type, which will help. And yeah, he'll go into Ganassi next year, hopefully, having the opportunity straight away to compete near the front of the field. And I wouldn't put it past him. You've got to be patient, but I wouldn't put it past him, getting some real headline results next year, judging off what we have already seen from him, which has been really impressive and only signs to show that he deserves this chance at a top team.
I know I've got Dixon and Alex Palou to learn from as well, so he's going to have quite a lineup, and I really hope we're going to see him contending for podiums and maybe even the odd win, because he's a guy who's had to wait for his opportunity, and he would thoroughly deserve some good results. That was the only big group of the drive market. Obviously, we said Grosjean is also announced to be leaving, but drive market wise, that's the only big one. We're expecting some huge stuff this week. As I said, there might even be stuff out by the time this podcast comes out, so we'll wait on that front.
Palou staying.
Palou, yes. So Palou was unofficially confirmed to be staying at Ganassi. Kind of saw us coming after the whole McLaren debacle. Winning combination, why wouldn't you keep it?
Yeah, I mean, Chip Ganassi doesn't usually get drawn into contractual things and driver market and what's happening in the future before the season's over, but I think Kevin Lee asked him yesterday, and he did say Alex Palou will be in our car next year, so I think that's all the confirmation you need, really. I think that quashes the rest of the suggestions that F1 could still be on the table. I think we will most likely see him in IndyCar next year, and we've spoken enough about him, but why on earth would Chip Ganassi not want Alex Palou in his car? You would not want him competing against you, and he is just proving to be a serial winner. So, yeah, no surprises, really.
Yeah. Maybe, well, much saying that 2 or 3 months ago, that it wouldn't be a surprise he stays at Ganassi. How times change in IndyCar. Looking down the ladder, Indy next was at Portland. Battle isn't quite wrapped up for Rasmussen. I think he's got about a 60-70 point lead heading into Laguna Seca, so it'll take quite something for him to be overthrown on that side. So probably see Rasmussen crowned in Laguna Seca race 1. McElroy's 65 points behind, so it's going to take a bit of a stretch for him. Siegel's a further 5 points behind McElroy. Looking one step beneath that is Indy Pro 2000, who did crown their champion, Myles Rowe, first African American to win on the road to Indy ladder. Started off the season in flying fashion, did Rowe, quieting out a bit towards the end of the season, but he's a Team Penske prodigy. He's very close to Will Power, and he's very excitingly going to be making a step up to Indy next year.
Yeah, it's very exciting to see. I mean, the whole Force Indy project, with the Penske involvement, Roger Penske obviously was one of the people who really orchestrated this, helping to push for sort of more diversity in motorsport. And it feels like a really significant moment that Myles Rowe has become the first African American to win an open wheel championship. He's making big waves, and hopefully it'll inspire a lot of people as well. Lewis Hamilton, for one, has congratulated him on Instagram, which, that will be big for Myles, who has said that Lewis is one of his big heroes. It was actually Will Power who spotted Myles at a karting track several years ago, and when this project was set up, I think in 2020, it was Power who suggested that he knew the perfect person for it. So it'll be really exciting to see Myles move up to Indy next year, and maybe down the line we'll end up with Penske, hopefully, and obviously their new formed alliance with AJ Foyt could help that. But yeah, really exciting stuff.
Yeah, he's definitely one for the future. I spoke off podcast. Maybe we could be looking at him in AJ Foyt for 2025. Because next season's good enough. So We'll see. But yeah, very exciting move. He's got the eyes of the world on him. It seems so. Good move for Myles Rowe. Let's look ahead to Laguna. Very briefly, 1 round to go. There's nothing on the line now, so who knows? We might be in for a fun one. Still loads of drivers waiting for a first win this year. Pato O'Ward, Will Power, Alex Rossi, Colton Herta, Roman Grosjean. You never know. Maybe they could pull a result of the bag. Herta's having his dad's throwback livery, which is very cool, in Herta's house, which is very cool. Looks really, really good as well, I must add. I predicted a couple of episodes ago that Palou would win the championship in Portland by winning the race. So call me Houdini or whatever. I predicted Herta is going to win in his throwback livery in Laguna, so I'm going to stick the same.
Yeah, did I say Graham Rahal, I think? Which
Rahal, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not improbable. It'd be nice.
Yeah.
I think we possibly will see a race where it is more gloves off. There is nothing really to fight for. Obviously, you got third in the championship with 3 drivers in contention for that. But even you look at McLaughlin as a bit of a long shot. So could hopefully be a race where you just see drivers, going for it, going for risky strategies, more risky moves, and I think I'd quite like to see Rahal win the race, if I'm being honest. I think after the year he's had, it would be a great story to have bounced back from the Indy 500 by closing the season out with a win. Obviously, 2 pole positions go some way to his redemption, but that would be nice. But it would also be nice to see Colton Herta win in what is, as you said, a quite beautiful livery. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, although I hesitate to say I'm looking forward to it, because looking forward to the race at Laguna ultimately means you're looking forward to the end of the season, which has come around in scarily quick fashion. It's going to get back to the time where we are getting excited just to see IndyCar drivers at, doing IMSA races or making appearances at the US Grand Prix for the F1. 6 months off. It's going to be painful, but we'll make sure we bring you some content still.
Yeah, 1 more to go. Bit of a shame, but we'll do our best to keep you occupied, and it's been a great season, and I'll have a proper debrief on it. But you look back at the moments like Newgarden winning the 500 to something like Di Francesco leading the first lap at Indy. It was. You look back on the season, such great memories, and it's such a shame you have such a huge off season. But the Unisec is always a bit of a fun one, especially when nothing's on the line. See how it is. I'm looking forward. So there we are. That is all we've got time for. Reviewing Portland and reviewing our 2023 IndyCar Series champion, Alex Palou, taking his 2nd title in dominant fashion. That means it's all gloves off at Laguna Seca next week, so that is going to be very fun to close out the season. So I have 1 more next week to look at Laguna Seca, the race review, and then we'll have a couple of season reviews and other bits towards the end of the season. Big driver news this week. We'll obviously get onto that next week, so keep your eye peeled for that on the Dive on Instagram. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you next week.